Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, everybody, this morning. We are going to share a little bit about literacy and SEBL. I'm Jill Gunther. I'm one of the social emotional behavioral learning specialists with Nebraska MTSS. And I currently serve Region 2 and 3, so ESUs 1, 7, 8, and then ESUs 2, 3, and then OPS. And I am going to let the other SEBLs that are on with us this morning introduce themselves as well. And then we have a couple special guests. Mackenzie?
Yeah, I'm Mackenzie Rydell. I'm the SEBL Specialist that serves Region 1. So that includes ESUs 4, 5, 6, and LPS.
Awesome. Thank you.
And I'm Chandra Essex. I am the Social Emotional Behavioral Learning Specialist for Region 4. So I work with ESUs 9, 10, 11, and 17.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And then we also have Sarah Gentry. She serves Region 5, which is ESUs 13, 15, and 16. And then we are super excited to have a couple special guests with us this morning. I'm going to let them introduce themselves as we get into that topic of literacy and SEBL. So Kayla?
Hi, I'm Kayla Payton. I am the Region 2 Regional Support Lead for Nebraska MTSS. I work with Jill in ESUs 2, 3, and 19.
And hello, good morning, everybody. I'm Mary Jo Macahos, and I am a statewide systems consultant with Nebraska MTSS with a focus on literacy systems and literacy components that fit into your MTSS. I'm super happy to be with you this morning.
Thanks so much, ladies. All right, so to get us started, we always like to start with our welcoming inclusion activities, part of those 3 inclusive practices: welcoming inclusion, engaging practices, and optimistic closures. You've probably heard us talk about it before, but if you have not checked out that first 5 link, it is a great free link, sends a ton of free resources that could be used for any of those inclusive practices, for morning meetings, for just building relationships. Each day to your email inbox. So if you've not checked it out, be sure to check it out. We wanted to just kind of be thinking about, as the weather is changing, like I feel like now almost all of the leaves are falling off the trees. I hear talk of like snow potentially in the next few days, so craziness. But as part of our just welcoming inclusion this morning, we just wanted to talk a little bit about mindfulness. It's a great way to really just kind of help reduce anxiety, help reduce stress, by really kind of just taking a moment to really focus on the present, right? To focus on that present moment, not worrying about maybe what's happened in the past, not worrying about what might happen in the future, but really just kind of focusing on the present moment. Mindfulness can be in so many different ways, right? Lots of different ways to kind of practice that mindfulness, but we really just wanted you guys, as we start our Wednesday here, just to take just about 30 seconds to a minute. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable. And really just kind of think about those changing seasons. You can picture something in your mind as you close your eyes, maybe thinking about those falling trees, thinking about just being really present in the moment as we share about SEBL and literacy, and just really making those connections. So again, if you feel comfortable, let's just take 30 seconds and just kind of get ourselves present. All right. Thank you for just taking that moment. As you think about those those changing seasons and those falling leaves. It really helps bring kind of that awareness to our surroundings, really thinking about some of the things as we maybe are going on the walk, thinking about the color of the sky around us, thinking about the breeze on our face, right? Maybe thinking about just kind of walking along and really thinking about what's around us and being present in that moment. So thank you for taking just those few seconds there. All right, so this is just a reminder about our Padlet that we do have available. We have it linked on the slide there. We have some different resources throughout our time together today that can be found in that literacy and SEBL resources block there, as well as some just other SEBL resources and our previous Coffee Connects. We always like to start off with a great quote. So as you can see here, studies indicate integrating SEL and literacy skills strengthens literacy outcomes. It supports that perspective taking and connecting students' emotions with characters in the text. So just a nice little quote there to kind of get us grounded as we start thinking about SEBL and literacy. This is our definition of social emotional behavioral learning. So really thinking about how we are systematically really fostering those social, those emotional skills for both students as well as adults, so that we can really create those safe, those supportive, those welcoming environments and have those positive both behavioral as well as mental health outcomes for all. And then, of course, our skills star with our SEBL skills there of self-awareness, self-management, problem solving, relationships, and pro-social behavior. We have a question with each of those skills just to kind of think about, and then just identifying some of those skills that fall within each of those different categories. So really thinking about that self-awareness. So thinking about those strengths, those interests, those emotions, those thoughts, behaviors. And as you can see with each of those 5 skills there, we like to just kind of expand to really get us thinking about those skills that fall within. So as we really make those connections between SEBL and literacy today, it's always a good idea to just kind of come back to this skills star and really think about some of those specific skills as we're kind of sharing some of that information and some of those resources today.
So as we continue throughout this presentation to draw connections between social, emotional, and behavioral skills and literacy, we felt it was really important to provide context by exploring the meaning of these terms, just as Jill gave us a brief review of the SEBL skills and what those mean, and also really thinking about what does that mean in terms of literacy, integration of those things into literacy. So as you're reading through this definition of literacy, which was put out by the National Council of Teachers of English, we've taken the liberty to highlight some of the phrases that we feel directly align with understandings around social emotional skills and how it makes sense to intentionally integrate these skills into the development of a student's literacy skills and continuum of learning in literacy. We know literacy is crucial for students of all abilities, as it empowers them to communicate effectively, access information, and really participate fully in society and interact with the larger world around them. This charge continues to evolve as we guide our students to think critically on their feet, to problem solve, and to communicate effectively. Additionally, literacy skills open doors to education and employment opportunities, leading to greater personal growth, including strengthening mental health, as well as professional fulfillment. So how are SEBL and literacy connected? Now that we've covered the definitions of these terms, we wanted to look a bit deeper at the integration of these 2 areas. Within the work that many of us on the screen do with regard to a multi-tiered system of support, or MTSS, the supports that we provide, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, obviously, but those are not only for academics or only for behavior or only for social emotional components. Rather, one of our core foundational principles or beliefs, if you will, that we build our work around is supporting the whole child. So as you can see on the slide, when students are not in a good place, physiologically, socially, emotionally, or cognitively, we know it's very difficult to learn, and they are at a disadvantage right off the bat. The next two bullets on the slide really refer to what needs to happen in the brain in order for this kind of learning, connected learning to occur. Through decades of research, including functional MRI studies that look into the brain, we know that these skills must be built through direct instruction, through creating environments where these skills can be built, building relationship, and all of those kinds of things. Then, so what is this? What can we do as educators? Right now in our state and across the nation, we are lifting up this emphasis on foundational literacy skills. It makes sense that right along with that push on foundational literacy skills, that we also focus on integrating other very critical foundational skills, those being SEBL, social emotional behavioral learning skills. Because when we ensure that those skills, SEBL skills, are developed and strengthened, we are really being proactive and preventative in student readiness and being able to learn that academic content. In this case, literacy and becoming a skilled reader. So again, what does that mean or look like for educators in the classroom in terms of application or bridging all of this research to practice? And our reality of working with groups of students or classrooms of students is really, put simply, just to have some overarching awareness, aware of these things, and thoughtfully structure our learning environments to better align with brain development principles and take into consideration, of course, the social and emotional health of our students. Through the growth of social emotional learning skills, students can begin to monitor their own learning journey, which contributes again to the development of perseverance and resilience and grit and growth mindset, all of those things that we really want for us, for our children, for our students. So as we go through the presentation, that was just kind of an overarching what as educators we can do and have the mindset around. As we go through the presentation, we are going to narrow down to some specific activities and things that can connect both of these areas for you. So we begin here to develop a why for integrating the areas of SEBL and literacy. And we're starting with providing some statistics and their sources, if you'd like to go back later and learn more in this regard. But some statistics on the effects of low literacy achievement on one's comprehensive health, which includes mental health. So you can see there that 9 out of 10 high school dropouts were struggling readers in 3rd grade. So, again, with that realization that these kinds of things, recognizing these things very early on will be very beneficial. Adults with below basic to basic literacy skills are over 5 times more likely to report being in poor health than their more literate counterparts. And low levels of literacy cost the United States up to $2.2 trillion per year. And that can look different in different supports that must be provided and put into place. But in addition, individuals with low levels of literacy are more likely to experience poor employment opportunities, earn a lower income and experience welfare dependency, have low self-esteem, which leads to higher crime, levels of crime, limited ability to make important informed decisions in everyday life. They struggle to just fill out basic forms, a job application, understanding government policies, reading medicine, nutritional labels, all of those things that we kind of take for granted as skilled readers and literate people. And so we just like to really draw that very direct relationship between mental health and the trajectory in one's life, really relying heavily on whether or not you are literate. So again, continuing to build a why and just just a little bit of basic knowledge. Many of you may be very familiar with these things that I'm going to talk about here in the next few slides, but just to give a kind of a foundation of understanding for how reading occurs and how people become a skilled reader. We felt it was important to lay that groundwork on the why behind this integration of SEBL and literacy, and we wanted to do that through illustrating this evolution of theoretical reading models over time. And so on the next few slides, we're going to walk through some of these well-known theoretical models. And we're hoping to, again, highlight that evolution that indicate that this is not a simple process, and we're learning more and more all the time as the science evolves about what all impacts literacy learning and proficient reading. Becoming a reader is not a natural process. Unlike speech and language, which is we are naturally wired to do. Our brains are not equipped to read naturally without some things happening first. So it is important as educators to understand the components that we must provide direct, explicit instruction around in order to build those neural pathways in the brain and connections to allow for that skilled reading to occur. So to begin, we're just going to take a quick look at this first model. It's called the simple view of reading, and it was developed by Goff and Tunmer in 1986. I do want you to pay attention to the year here, because as we go through these models, you'll see again this evolution of the science and how much more we're learning about back to that whole child and what all impacts reading. So in this particular model, I'm going to just talk a little bit more, Mackenzie, about the simple view real quick, and then we'll move to this one. So according to this model, comprehension is the product of word recognition, which is also called decoding, and language comprehension. So if a student is proficient in word recognition and language comprehension, the result is strong reading comprehension or skilled reading. That is our goal. If a student has strong word recognition, but a weakness in language comprehension, the student will not be able to comprehend what they read. Likewise, if the student has strong language comprehension, perhaps they have a strong vocabulary, they come, from a place where there's a lot of communication in the home, and they have a lot of experiences and background knowledge and all of those kinds of things, but perhaps they have a weakness in decoding and that sound symbol correspondence and working through words and lifting words off the page, then similarly, they're not going to get to reading comprehension. So basic idea around multiplication is applied to this model. If we have, strong, like if I would apply the number 1 in one of these areas and a zero in another area, then the result would be 0. So we need both in order to get to skilled reading. Both word recognition and language comprehension. And then the simple view of reading is really just one model to help teachers build that capacity and begin to target the focus of instruction and intervention for students. While the model is called the simple view, we will see in the next few slides, as we look at additional theoretical models, that it's not quite this simple and actually involves a multitude of skills converging and developing to achieve. So the next model, moving along in this evolution of reading models, is called Scarborough's reading rope, and this was developed by Hollis Scarborough in the early 2000s. Okay, so again, paying attention to the year, the last one was 1986, was the simple view of reading. Now we're into the early 2000s, and this was also a time where the National Reading Panel was coming together with this convergence of all of this research. These were things where we were born out of that NRP or National Reading Panel, were things like the Big Five. So that sounds familiar to you probably. So Hollis Scarborough really used this rope metaphor to expand on the simple view of reading, which you still see the simple view of reading captured here. You see word recognition on the left, and you see language comprehension, and then all the way over to the right, you see reading comprehension, which is again the goal of becoming a skilled reader. So the rope was used by Hollis Scarborough to explain the complexity of reading to both parents and educators in a way that is relatable and understandable. The rope illustrates how the components of reading must be brought together, woven like the strands of a rope, to produce a skilled reader who can comprehend complex grade level text. You see word recognition at that bottom blue rectangle down there. And again, that's straight from the simple view of reading. But then we begin to see how it's built out into individual instructional components representing strands of the rope in areas like phonological awareness and decoding and sight recognition. Word recognition skills, the strands at the bottom, are referred to as constrained, meaning they are sequential. We introduce them from simpler to more complex. They are finite, right? We want students to be able to master these foundational skills in word recognition, and we want them to become increasingly automatic. So to get them to automaticity and mastery. Once these skills become automatic, then cognitive load is able to shift to allow more focus on those upper strands of the rope you see with language comprehension, requiring more cognitive load to dig into complex text and deeper language components. So the language comprehension skills are refined throughout our lives, so they are infinite, right? We are still, as skilled readers, developing those things into adulthood as we build our knowledge on certain things and build our vocabulary. For me personally, I see a natural, organic opportunity to weave in SEBL skills in those language comprehension strands of the rope, right? That's not to say that we don't build language skills in the lower part of the reading rope. We absolutely must build both all the time in parallel. I just think in my mind, in terms of SEBL skills, they just lend themselves nicely to some of those upper strands of the rope. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. This next model here that I want to talk about is developed by Kim in 2020. Again, progression of time. Scarborough's reading rope was early 2000s. This is now 2020. This model is called the direct and indirect effects model of reading, or the DEAR model. And I just want you to take a look at this for a minute, because remember the simple view was very simple. We had those two components. Now we got a lot going on, right? We're starting to evolve with what we're learning about the brain and around all of those variables that impact skilled reading. We very clearly are seeing that it's not quite that simple. Kim is illustrating here at the very bottom of this model things that are considered a foundation that support everything else. And I want you to notice that very bottom bar. This is where we see things like executive function skills that include things like working memory and attention control. They have a direct connection to both components of reading, which you again see the simple view components right there in the middle, word reading on the left and listening or language comprehension on the right. Additionally, in the upper left-hand corner of this model, this is the first mention we have here in these research models of socio-emotion, right? Which includes things like a reader's motivation, beliefs and attitudes towards reading. This model provides even more evidence that it is critical to have that teaching the whole child mindset in place as we plan and deliver instruction in reading. And then finally, this last model is called the active view of reading. And again, many of you maybe have seen a lot of these different models. This one was created by Duke and Cartwright in 2021. So pretty close on that timeline of development as Kim's model. And there are a lot of similarities here. But now in this active view, we see an intentional inclusion of these things. This model really emphasizes that reading skills are not learned passively. Students must have an active interaction with the text. You still see remnants of the simple view for certain, right? You see them right there with word recognition and language comprehension. But this builds on the idea of what the reader brings to the table in terms of not only academics, but in that green circle there on the slide, we see active self-regulation coming into play, which again includes things like motivation, executive functioning, strategy application to text types of skills. For this reason, you often see this model coined as the reader model. You can begin to see even more alignment as Mackenzie's going to go through these animations coming up of the particular skills that are covered here. But you'll see things more aligned to those SEBL skills in the text boxes for each component. Things that kind of jump out to me are you're going to see things that relate to building relationships, to self-management, to perspective taking, to problem solving, and those kinds of things are coming out very loud and clear in this active view of reading model. In sum, the active view of reading suggests that effective reading comprehension requires the coordination, again, of word recognition and language comprehension, but also self-regulation, and all of those things then dynamically come together and support all of these areas through some bridging processes. So a lot of connections there. As we've been discussing this piece of motivation, I wanted to zero into this Matthew effect in reading. And again, many of you maybe have heard of this. But really, when we think about the knowledge that literacy is arguably the most important educational competency, it's actually been the most researched content area in the field of education. And what we've already discussed, right? Without the ability to read, students face a host of challenges that follow them throughout their academic, professional, and personal lives. So enter here is something called the Matthew effect. And the term describes this phenomenon where students who begin their literacy education successfully continue to do well and continue to be successful in school, while those who begin poorly or get off on the wrong foot or struggle, they seem to continue to do worse. So the name of the effect comes from a famous Bible verse in the book of Matthew that essentially calls out in support of early identification, but really it talks about the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, if you've ever heard that before. Really illustrates that urgent call out in support for early identification, as well as that extreme importance of strong evidence-based instruction and intervention. If we can interrupt the Matthew effect, we are not only going to help students in becoming proficient readers, but in strengthening their social, emotional, and behavioral learning skills and supporting their overall mental health as well. You can see the spiral downward depicted on the slide from the initial point of a student struggling in reading. It's imperative that we find out right away where the breakdown is happening and then address it and interrupt this effect. And we can do that through instruction, targeted instruction. When children fail at early reading and writing, which again can happen for a multitude of reasons, including but not limited to a lack of instruction or a lack of correct instruction, trauma, dyslexia, attention issues, when they are lacking in those areas or struggling in those areas, they begin to dislike reading and writing. As a result, they read less than their classmates who are stronger readers, setting off this sort of domino effect that then impacts their growth in vocabulary and their access to high-level text and concepts and literacy elements. So again, if there's not a disruption to this downward spiral, most definitely we see damage done to a student's overall mental health. They notice right away, and many of you probably have seen this with particular students. They feel different. They might call themselves dumb. They might feel dumb or embarrassed. You will see behaviors definitely being exhibited to get out of reading or writing or something that's really causing them these feelings. So we really want to interrupt this negative perpetuating cycle if we can. Conversely here, when children are successful, right, coming in at early reading, they develop a love for it and seek out opportunities to read more and more, their vocabulary expands, their knowledge of higher level concepts grows, and consequently they become more confident and successful, not only in reading, but usually in lots of all other academic areas as well. So the poor readers continue to be poor readers while the strong readers continue to get stronger. And what happens is we have a large gap between these two that continues, or that begins and continues to expand. We know that a child's ability to read effectively will have a long lasting impact on every aspect of their lives, because reading really affects everything and every content area. So in regard to the Matthew effect, longitudinal studies show that 74% of children who are poor readers in the 3rd grade remain poor readers in the 9th grade. We talked about that earlier. This supports the need, again, for early identification and intervention. I want you to notice in this graph that students coming into kindergarten, so notice coming in at age 5 into kindergarten roughly, students are quite close in achievement level. But very quickly, you see the gap begin to widen. It's really, again, goes back to that idea around critical to overall educational well-being, that we provide the right kind of instruction, aligned to the science and evidence, and intensify that instruction early on if we see a student with a deficit in a particular foundational skill area. Many educators believe that the Matthew effect does not occur in isolation. I think we proved that point as we looked at all of those impacts and variabilities that play into becoming a skilled reader. You know, obviously things like access to resources, poverty, and other factors are inextricably linked here. Nevertheless, the literacy gap is real, and it's a pressing issue in the field of education. In fact, our state is engaged in large-scale literacy work, including impactful legislation as we speak, because we can no longer wait for students to fail or fall behind enough to intervene in this regard. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kayla to talk more specifics on around the what and the how we address both of these important areas in our interactions with students.
Absolutely. So let's get into what we can do as educators to support our students within that context of literacy and SEBL. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some high leverage practices and strategies, and more important, the first thing I'm going to talk about is some mindsets that are important to carry into both inside and outside the classroom as we're working with our students. You're going to notice that some of the practices, strategies, and mindsets are not earth-shattering, but what we want to do is we want to just focus on making sure that we are being intentional with our planning, and then we're really getting into the piece of getting to know our students, knowing their strengths, knowing their interests, and those possible barriers when it comes to literacy instruction. So, first of all, while it seems simple, we know that learning to read and reading to learn require relationships grounded in trust, especially when nurturing those striving readers. Building relationships is also very important for our students of all ages and across all learning variabilities. But we know that for our early literacy learners, their processes in learning to read and reading to learn include things like trying out new skills, making mistakes, and corrective or positive specific feedback from teachers. And then with our more mature literacy learners, their process include things like perspective taking, considering how actions affect others, and then that productive discourse when there's a disagreement, maybe between characters and maybe between readers. We know that all levels of literacy include some sort of risk-taking, resilience building, and stamina. And we know that those trusting and respectful relationships between student and teacher and among students is necessary for the context of fostering and maintaining confidence and engaging in the work. So when we're embedding SEL into that literacy instruction, we know that we can create those affirming and supportive environments that will encourage every student to persevere as they work towards mastery in literacy. So carrying that factor a step further, what are some of those components that need to exist in our relationships with students? I always like a good Hattie reference. We always bring it up within NeMTSS, but just want to remind you, if you've never heard of Hattie before, John Hattie's research sought to answer one essential question, and that question is, which variables have the greatest impact on student achievement? When we're talking about his research, he talked about a hinge point of 0.4, which if you're engaging in that strategy or that variable exists within the classroom environment, a 0.4 will indicate a year's worth of growth for students. So in Hattie's research, there are some negative factors that impact students like suspension and expulsion, high mobility, or anxiety. But things that are positive that impact students are things like parental involvement and, of course, positive student-teacher relationships. I do want to talk about the number one indicator that has the greatest impact on student success, which is teacher estimates of achievement, which means what is that impact of holding high expectations for our students? What this means is we must believe that our students are capable of growth and success in whatever skill, concept, or task that we put in front of them. So one of my favorite quotes that kind of goes along with this indicator or factor is, to get students to believe in themselves, we have to conduct ourselves in a way that expresses our beliefs in them, including all the daily interactions that make up the emotional environment. And we have to create structures and routines that would only exist if we believe our students could be successful at a proficient level. So for example, we have teachers and sometimes that have notions about a student's ability that have no basis in fact. If a teacher says to a student that they do or do not have that ability to do something, the student will eventually start to believe that and start to behave according to what the teacher expects. Once an expectation develops, even if it's wrong, people believe as if the belief were true. And in other words, that would be that self-fulfilling prophecy. So when considering those critical mindsets and the indicators of success in our literacy classrooms, and when we're practicing literacy and within literacy instruction, we have to ask ourselves, do we believe that all kids can learn and grow? Do we believe that we can support each student in achieving their academic goals? But more importantly, do we speak to kids and about kids in a way that is in line with that growth mindset? And then are our actions towards students in line with those beliefs? So going back to that Matthew effect that that Mary Jo was talking about earlier. So the pursuit that we as educators have to be on is that pursuit of mitigating the Matthew effect. It makes sense from thinking about Hattie's research that there's so many things that we can do in the building level as educators at the classroom level that we can do to close that achievement gap within instruction and with social emotional behavioral learning. So number one, of course, is we're considering that classroom environment. Are we making it positive and welcoming, distraction-free? Are our working spaces conducing to learning and processing information? Are we engaging in things like morning meetings, intentional relationship building, and team building activities? Are we focusing on that growth mindset, which I alluded to in the previous slide with that teacher expectations of achievement? Number three, are we providing all students the opportunity to shine? Do we know what all of our students are interested in and what they're experts in? Sometimes they will surprise us on what they know a ton about. And then how can we encourage them to share what they're passionate about? Are we utilizing things like universal design, options for action and expression, access to materials, and providing relevant and engaging literature? Number four, are we acknowledging those learner differences? Are we explaining to students how the learning brain and the reading brain work? And are we trying to make learner variability the norm? Some other essential practices. So number five, providing that direct and explicit instruction, and then making sure that we're ensuring access to quality tier 1 core instruction for each student, because this is the heart of our work. Our job as educators is to lay that solid foundation and then accelerate or add additional supports from them there. And then are we number 6? Are we ending that waiting to fail model? When we do that, when we wait for that 20-point discrepancy, we are actively promoting the Matthew effect. Instead of that, we want to number 7, make sure we're recognizing those at-risk behaviors. And then 8, making sure that we are identifying kids early for either intervention or additional supports and providing that early intervention. Do we have those collaborative practices and problem-solving structures that will ensure that happens? Do we have adequate resources? And then can we identify students who are experiencing reading frustration? What are those avoidant behaviors? What are those behaviors like, are they slamming their book shut and are putting their head down? Or are they leaving the room? Or are there other signs that indicate that other layered supports are needed? And of course, with number 9, are we making sure that families are our partners within literacy? And are we talking to parents about growth mindset? And then lastly, are we adding that option for additional tutoring when it's necessary and when it's needed? Something really powerful, but often overlooked is that power of background knowledge. This is how our students get ahead and stay ahead in literacy. It is part of Scarborough's rope, and it also can contain some basic skills, but we can expand on those basic skills into all levels of. So why is background knowledge important? So it gives our students that motivation and confidence in, to engage in reading tasks, and it builds their ability to interact with more complex text. It also, like I said before, prevents frustration in various dimensions of literacy and learning. But to back this all up with research and the reason why background knowledge is so important, there was a study called the baseball study that you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen. That backs this up, and the basis behind all of this is the baseball study proves that background knowledge is that strong predictor of comprehension of a text on a specific topic, even more so than reading proficiency. So in short, here's how the study went. It was about 37 years ago. Researchers gave a standardized reading test to a group of 7th and 8th graders. The students were classified by either achievement level, so low, high, medium, and their levels of background knowledge on baseball, the sport, the rules, the history, important players, right? So students were given a passage about baseball, then given a standardized reading comprehension test. And what made the difference in those test scores was the amount of background knowledge that the students had. So interestingly enough, the students who were classified as poor readers, but had a rich set of prior knowledge about baseball, about the sports, scored higher than those who were good readers who didn't know much about baseball. So what does this mean for us? What is crucial is how much relevant knowledge our students have about a text or a topic before, after, and during reading. We know that knowledge is like Velcro on our students, right? So students who start out with more knowledge or more Velcro and more vocabulary are in a better position to gain even more knowledge and more vocabulary as they read more, either about the topic or related topics. What we have to understand is that strategy instruction cannot compensate for gaps in background knowledge. We can't expect our students to make inferences on information they don't know. So that's why background knowledge is super important. I do want to cover a couple of areas or types of background knowledge that are important for the classroom. Because background knowledge is more than just gaining information and facts. It serves a number of purposes when comprehending text. So I want to take a little bit of look at cultural and linguistic knowledge. This just hit me a little bit ago because I wanted to say earlier, let's get into the meat and potatoes of everything. But that's a cultural and linguistic area that some of our students don't know. Those are those things like idioms, similes, and metaphors. Like what are our students learning through language, their language and their home life experience? It doesn't have to be other languages spoken. We have our own kind of set of language within our home lives or within our friend groups. And so what do our students bring to the classroom with that? Another one is textual knowledge. Textual knowledge comes in 3 different forms. Like, what are the structures that we're reading about? So is it compare or contrast? Is it fact or fiction? Is it chronological order? We also need to pay attention to features. Do our students know things like, what is a table of contents? Where do we find the glossary? What is a heading? What is a subheading? What does it mean when there's a word bolded in a textbook? And then another thing is, what are the types of text? Like, is it prose? Is it fiction or nonfiction? What genre is it? Those are all background knowledge things that really make sense and really make a difference when students are about to read something. And not only within literacy or reading or language arts classroom, this matters cross-curricularly, sorry. We need to just make sure that our students have that knowledge before we're engaging in that reading. I will talk shortly about word knowledge, but word knowledge really does depend on vocabulary. And so that's what let's go to the next slide and talk about why vocabulary is important. So explicit vocabulary instruction is definitely a way to build students' confidence and literacy skills. Rich vocabulary has an implicit impact on our students' ability to more easily understand what they're reading. Again, a rich vocabulary helps prevent reading frustration, similar impact that background knowledge has, and it also helps combat that Matthew effect. It also fuels comprehension. Students can problem solve around unknown words or using context, but we know that when there's too much stop and start in the reading process, there are some negative effects that go along with that. So when we're too much stopping and starting, it's going to interfere with active comprehension. We're going to forget what we read about. It's going to demotivate our students. That's when they're going to slam the book shut and put their head down. And too much stop and start in regards to vocabulary is going to impose that ceiling on where our kids are going to top out with the complex text. So what can we do? The goal of vocabulary instruction is not to learn words for word's sake. The goal is for students to apply their knowledge about words and their meanings to better understand what they're reading about and to expand the possibilities for expressing their own ideas in conversation and in writing. So how do we do it? On the left-hand side, here are some ideas on the types of vocabulary or the types of words that are important to teach. So unknown words, words important to understand in a passage or a unit that we're finding in our textbooks, words that are difficult to understand, so things that are complex, abstract, or difficult to pronounce. And then those academic words, we call those precision words. So those are those words used across content area and that we're going to use those to be successful in other classes. So those are the words like examine or establish, verify, or organize. And then for our older students, we want to focus in on those specialized words for those domain-specific academics. It might be medical terms or legal terms, science and mathematics terms. It might be more advanced language arts terms. One of my favorite vocabulary words in language arts is red herring. It might be a social studies word like authoritative or a math word like inverse. So then taking a look at the right-hand side, these are some of our instructional strategies that we can use with vocabulary. Super important is that teaching of affixes, especially with Greek and Latin roots. A lot of our language, a lot of the English language is rooted in Greek and Latin roots. When we are engaging in explicit instruction with Greek and Latin roots, we are examining different parts of unfamiliar words, and then we can compare and contrast that to words that students already know. And we can make meanings out of unfamiliar words with affixes, prefixes, suffixes, Greek and Latin roots that we already know. So for example, one of a really common Greek and Latin root is ology. I know that's the study of. I also know bio means life. And so when I put those together, biology means the study of life. So we also want to make sure that we're focusing on explicit vocabulary instructions for those words that will be immediately important. So those are going to be the words that are going to read in a passage. So it's important to engage in explicit and consistent routine for teaching those words. So we want to make sure that We are teaching our words in almost the same way every class period. We don't want to switch it up because when we're engaging in consistent routines, that frees up our students' cognitive desk space to be able to learn more and to do more. So some methods for explicit vocabulary instruction might be introducing the words in a student-friendly language, including examples and non-examples, especially ones that are familiar to students, relating the word through symbols or illustrations. We know our kids love to draw pictures and love to find clip art on the internet. So having them use pictures for words, making sure that we're checking for understanding, and then providing those multiple opportunities for students to interact with the words through things like discussion, gameplay, and interactive activities. And then along with those previous explicit strategies, we want to make sure that we highlight these literacy strategies that support and foster SEBL growth, but are also just darn good teaching strategies in general, not just within literacy, but within every academic content area across the board. Beyond these, there are other examples of how you can facilitate conversations around literacy. We know that conversations around what we read are explicitly important because that's how we process what we read and make sense out of what we've read. And we want to make sure that we're targeting those SEBL skills. So a couple of conversative techniques would be things like Socratic seminar or fishbowl conversations. So one more strategy that we want to cover is something called interactive read alouds, or can relate that to think alouds. So we know that research indicates that integrating social emotional behavioral learning into education improves literacy outcomes and academic achievement. So to complement those SEL practices, we're going to engage in something called dialogic reading. And it encourages that interactive engagement, the language development, and comprehension skills in young children. So like I said before, that dialogic reading could be interactive read alouds or think alouds. And what they are they interactive strategies where adults and students have those meaningful conversations around the text. Doesn't take a lot of explicit planning. It could be simply that we're stopping to talk about certain words that are confusing as we're reading along. Or it could be something about cultural context or something about structural context. So interactive read alouds really give kids and teachers the opportunity to think about what they're reading as they're reading. It's that metacognitive skill. And so also those conversations between students and between teachers and students really do improve children's literacy and language skills. And they are an easy way to weave in those SEBL supports and skills. The last thing I really want to talk about is a really high indicator of social emotional learning, and that is the importance of representation and relevance to students' lives. It really is essential to students' social emotional behavioral learning and well-being. So a lady by the name of Rudine Sims Bishop conducted some research, and her research highlighted the importance of students having different types of reading experiences. She created the perfect metaphor of children and young adult literature serving as mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. So this concept stresses the importance of students seeing themselves and others in texts that they read and being able to enter new worlds through text. This also directly aligns with all areas of the NeMTSS SEBL skills stars discussed previously, my bad. So when we talk about windows and literature, it helps us understand the wider world around us. It helps us give us a view of what other people do and how other people act. It helps us understand lives that are different from our own, like a window into other people's experiences. And it provides us that opportunity to stretch our perspective taking and empathy. Mirrors, conversely, is when students read stories where they see characters who look like them, who act like them, that have cultures and religions and experiences just like them. And those characters are valued in that literature. It helps our students feel that sense of belonging. I can't tell you how powerful it is for our students to read or listen to a story about students or kids just like them. So when we're considering using literature as mirrors, we want to make sure as educators that we know about our students and the communities in which we teach and which we serve. We want to know what's important about our students and their communities, what's special about it, and how can we connect to and reflect the culture of their lived experiences, either in the current or in the past. What is especially important is how can we provide that representation of students' individual, family, and community lives in the stories we read. And then the other concept is sliding glass doors. And this is an extension of the concept of windows. So instead of just viewing another person's perspective or culture, sliding glass doors allows our readers to walk into a story and become part of the world. The goal here for sliding glass doors is to reflect on characters' actions and characters' words. It reflect on their moral courage, what it takes to do the right thing, those choices between right and wrong. And sliding glass doors definitely results in a reader's change of perspective.
Awesome. Thank you, Kayla. There's just so much that we could talk about day after day about literacy and SEBL and those connections. And Mary Jo and Kayla did a great job opening us up and talking about where our competencies lie within different strategies we use within the models, within our instructional strategies. But I'm just going to make that direct, explicit connection between our standards here in Nebraska and how we can help SEBL live within those standards. So as you all probably know, we don't have specific social emotional learning standards in Nebraska, but we see a lot of how we can integrate that within. So we dove into our ELA standards. And as you see on this image here, there's actually a component about social, emotional, and academic development within that. And if you dive into that document, there's a whole page that talks about the CASEL competencies, and it actually dives a little bit deeper. So we know that social emotional learning really does live within our literacy curriculum. We don't need standards to hit or model or target these skills. So what does that look like within our standards? I pulled some standards across different grades. We talk all the time about when we talk about SEBL, it's not just those early learning grades. It really is a skill that we foster from birth all the way to death. We're really practicing it and learning and growing in our SEBL skills throughout our entire life. So we'll just start here with that kindergarten. So we have our 5 SEBL skills. We have self-awareness, self-management, problem-solving, relationships, and pro-social behavior. So I kind of color-coded and pulled out where those might fit. So this first kindergarten standard is with prompting and support, participate with peers and adults in structured discussions and routines about kindergarten topics and text. So right away, we're really honing in on that relationship skill. We're participating with our peers and adults, and we're having to probably have conversations and interact with others, which really targets those skills around relationships. They're needing to ask pertinent questions to acquire information. So realizing what they do know, self-awareness, and then being able to self-manage to advocate and ask for that information that they need. Demonstrating interpretation of verbal and nonverbal messages ties into that pro-social behavior. So being able to take different perspectives, to think beyond just their little box in their little world. I'll do D, developing attentive listening skills, really talking about that self-awareness. So what does listening look like? How am I doing right now with that? Thinking about eye contact, using nonverbal cues. That really hones in on that self-awareness. Third grade, I feel like this is where a lot of us land when we think of how SEBL fits within literacy. We think about characters in books. And so this standard here explain how characters respond to major events and challenges in a literary text. So we pulled out that pro-social behavior, again, perspective taking, understand different feelings and emotions, being able to jump into the shoes of somebody else's experience and feel and think about what that might look, feel, and sound like. The same with 8th grade, just moving it up a notch, interpreting an author's use of language, really diving into that pro-social behavior. Why does the author write this? Why might they use this irony or this pun, and what does that mean? And so diving into those pro-social behaviors. And then with 12th grade, synthesize and evaluate how the interaction of individuals, important events, and key ideas contribute to the meaning of the work as a whole. I highlighted different parts here, but when we're synthesizing and evaluating, we're really honing in on those problem-solving skills, being able to think, to identify what's going on, to really analyze and think through that whole problem-solving process, interacting with others, those relationship skills, what does that look, sound, feel like, and then that pro-social behavior, thinking about those perspective-taking skills. So this is really just a quick snapshot of where that might fit, but hopefully it helps you think a little further on how you can see those SEL live into your ELA standards. And then just an encouragement, something that could be helpful as you're creating lessons. How can you embed those SEBL skills and objectives within your ELA lessons, or maybe not even ELA, but really any subject area? So when you're thinking about your lessons, you will think about, obviously, what do you want your students to know by the end of your lesson or experience? And then thinking about that direct connection of where do these SEBL skills live and correspond within that lesson, and how will they need to practice these skills to support the lesson? Because we know we don't always have to do a SEL lesson or a curriculum to teach these skills. We can really integrate it throughout everything we're doing. So an example here, I pulled a 10th grade ELA standard. So the content of this lesson, you're wanting students to write arguments to develop a perspective with supporting reasons and evidence organized as appropriate to the task, purpose, and audience. So that is copy paste that standard. And then when we're making that direct connection to SEBL, students will use critical thinking to develop these arguments that include multiple viewpoints. So they're going to have to think about their pro-social behavior with that perspective taking, problem solving, using critical thinking to develop these arguments. So really making those connections more explicit. There are a couple of resources linked on the bottom of the slide. That Boston Public Schools one really just dived into creating a lesson with these SEBL objectives. And then the other two are just example lesson plans that you can use to further support the work. And then finally, if you're wanting to dive deeper into this, we have linked a couple of white papers. So that left and right one are different white papers around literacy within those social emotional development. And that middle one is kind of neat. It's kind of like a magazine feel. And so you can flip through and it talks about ELA and SEL in your classroom at play. And it has a couple resources that we linked in the Padlet that really just makes that connection between your SEL standards and those social emotional skills. So with that, we appreciate you sticking around. I know we went over time quite a ways, but we would love if you can give us any feedback. for our exit ticket, and next month we'll meet December 18th, early childhood SEBL. We do have our dates out for the spring, so save those dates. We have our flyer out for the spring also. And then just a plug, we have these great foundational literacy webinars that are out. So go find those out on our YouTube channel. We're going to skip the optimistic closure. So just think how you can integrate this into your everyday, or share it with somebody who is in the classroom.